Hey guys, Mitsuha here from KMG. A man by the name of Frank Smith once said, "Language is not a genetic gift, it is a social gift. Learning a new language is becoming a member of the club, the community of speakers of that language." But how exactly does one go about becoming a member of that club? To many, learning a new language may sound like a fun goal, but it oftentimes may seem an unattainable one as well. From choosing the language you want to learn, to deciding the learning approach or approaches that you want to take, to gathering resources and materials to aid you in your studies, and all things in between, it can quickly become an overwhelming process. Fortunately, once broken down a bit more, the process becomes much more straightforward, allowing you to more easily pursue your language learning goals. Before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's go about finding a language to learn. There are certainly at least a couple of languages out there, and when it comes to choosing one, I would recommend finding one that fits your interests. For the sake of this video, I'll assume that you're an English speaker and base this off of that. So with that in mind, let's say that since you already speak English, maybe you want to learn something similar to that. After all, that should be easy enough, right? There are a good amount of these languages as well, which is why we see such popularity in learning languages such as Spanish, German, and Italian among English speakers. While all completely different languages, they have a lot in common with each other, from shared words to similar grammatical structures, which makes learning them much more approachable than something like, say, Russian. On that note though, maybe you aren't looking for something so similar. Maybe you're wanting more of a challenge, perhaps with a language completely different to English. At this point, I might recommend something like Japanese, Korean, Mandarin, or Arabic. These are all thought to be among the more difficult languages for a native English speaker, and can definitely provide a fun challenge for anyone studying them. Alright, so now you've chosen a language. What now? Well, with your chosen language in mind, now comes the part where you decide how you want to learn it. Most conventionally, we're probably familiar with the idea of reading textbooks and taking notes, but these days this is far from your only option. Sure, you can grind your way through a language through many rigorous months or years of reading textbooks and creating thousands of flashcards, but this alone won't necessarily get you to fluency. For one thing, the tediousness and seemingly mundane nature of this method can tend to drive people away, as they may grow bored of it in time, if this is all that they're doing. In addition to this, the type of language taught by textbooks is often very awkward, and if you use it with natives, you'll certainly sound a bit strange. One way to experience and learn language in a more natural form is through the story learning method, popularized by polyglot and language teacher Ollie Richards. In this method, after being able to read the alphabet of a given language and having a basic amount of vocabulary under your belt, you simply find material written in your target language and read it. At first, you'll understand next to nothing, but that's okay. Actually, you're encouraged to just push through this and struggle through whatever it is, going through it several times to try to pick up words and grammar through context, only looking them up when absolutely necessary. You also want to make sure to be reading things that are at an appropriate level so that everything isn't going right over your head, because while it is important to struggle, too much of a struggle can cause unnecessary stress and greatly decrease productivity, even leading to eventual burnout in some cases. Similarly to the story method, there's my favorite method, known as the immersion method. With this, you're again exposing yourself to the language in its more natural forms, just in a much more diverse way. In the immersion method, you can watch shows and movies, listen to music, play video games, and do just about anything else you might want to do, all in your target language. Similarly again to the story method, you don't want to rely so heavily on a dictionary, but rather pick things up over time through context and repetition. This isn't to say that you should never be looking words or grammar patterns up though. In fact, my foreign dictionaries are some of my most used apps for a reason, as they will prove to be invaluable throughout this process. Lastly, I'll go over what I'm going to broadly call the online/digital method. This will cover apps and websites of all sorts. Many of you are likely already acquainted to some extent with Duolingo, be that from personal experience or the many memes, but in addition to this, there are many other apps and websites out there, some better than others, for essentially any language you can think of. They all work a bit differently, and with enough research, you should be able to definitely find one that fits your desired learning style. In addition to these types of apps and websites, there are also others, such as the popular site italki, where you can be partnered up with a teacher or a language partner who will teach you the language personally. It's similar to the classroom approach in the sense that you're being taught by an actual person, but with a few added benefits. One is that this is a bit more personal, as it's simply between you and the person you met with, rather than them and an entire class. Seeing as this isn't an actual class, this also means that they don't have to force you through a curriculum that's going to teach you the weird textbook version of a language. In addition to this, these sorts of meetings also give you the opportunity to actually practice speaking the language with someone, which is often an overlooked part of the process. Without ever speaking, you'll continue to struggle, and though it may be challenging at first, it's definitely something you need to work at, as it will prove to be an invaluable skill down the line. This is why even if you're not doing something like italki, it's important to find a natively fluent speaker somewhere to practice with, be that virtually or in person. So lastly, before wrapping things up, we'll look quickly at some different resource options. Now, this largely comes down to which study methods you go with, but to make that a bit easier, allow me to let you in on a little secret. That secret is that you should never be doing just one of these methods, but rather by doing several of them together, you will learn much more at a far greater rate. This isn't to say that you have to do them all, but by combining several of them, you'll cover far more grounds with the language and become much better acquainted with its different components. With that said, we'll finally look at some of the materials and resources you may want. First, we'll look at books. These can be either digital or physical depending on your preferences, but you may definitely want to consider picking some up. That could be textbooks, as while they may not be the most accurate to naturally speaking, they still have a lot to offer, or it could be regular books simply for the sake of reading. These are especially fun, as now you have the opportunity to discover countless new books that your native language may have never had. This also allows you to re-experience books that you may have already read in your native language in a completely new way. The same can be said for video games as can for books. In fact, all things covered within the immersion method kind of fit in that same line of thought. Some things like movies, shows, and music can be easily found online in your target language, though video games can be a bit trickier depending on your chosen language and the game itself. Fortunately, video games are becoming much more accessible in other languages, so it's much easier to find games these days than it would have been, say, 15 or 20 years ago. Lastly, for essential resources, you may want to look into some apps and websites for things like reading, speaking, and general studies. Again, there are many out there, and while they may vary in quality and price, with some prior research, you shouldn't have any issue finding one to suit your needs. Now, I suppose I could go on for quite a while longer and make this much more in-depth, but seeing as I only really intended for this to be a basic overview to language learning, I feel that this should definitely be enough. Learning a language can be a long, grueling process, but with enough dedication and determination, as well as the right approach and techniques, it can definitely be made much easier than one might first think. There's a lot to it, but hopefully with this video as a simple starting point, you can find the inspiration to go out there and learn a new language yourself. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and as always, we will see you guys next time.